Welcome to this rapid revision session on exam skills. Paper 3, question 2, 3 and 4. That's for the Pearson Edexcel specification. These exam questions focus on interpretations, but you'll need some source skills too. Question 1 is a purely source skills based question, and I'll address that in a separate video. So let's get cracking with these questions. Firstly, you've got to understand that actually the source questions and the interpretations questions are likely to be on a common theme, as the answers are designed to be answered together. So there's a significant amount of luck, you might say, in which topic comes up and whether that's one of your strengths. The only way to be truly prepared in terms of knowledge is to know everything. But that goes for any exam, doesn't it? For this illustrative example, I'm going to be looking at Rolling Thunder, an image of which is shown here. This was the American bombing campaign over North Vietnam from 1965 all the way through to 1968. That was the most long-lasting strategic bombing campaign of the war. It's also one of the most controversial, and that's the nature with interpretations. They're looking at contrasting historical views, how they can be backed up by certain evidence, and also testing your ability to compare them and the strengths of them. So let's have a look at some examples. In paper 3, you will have already answered a question on some sources, and you will be able to use these sources where they are relevant in the other questions too, even though they're more focused on the interpretations. So let's get you started by looking at a pair of illustrative sources. Here's the picture from Rolling Thunder that we saw earlier. Source A, US Navy A-4 Skyhawk attack aircraft during a precision dive bombing attack on a road bridge in North Vietnam circa 1966. So you'll decide whether or not this actually provides you with useful information. Then source B. Former F-105 Thunder Chief pilot, Lieutenant Colonel I should say, being American, Billy Sparks, USAF retired, describes the bombing strategy for Rolling Thunder in a TV interview in 1998. That TV interview is on a program called Wings Over Vietnam, which I believe you can find on YouTube if you search for it. There were 3 massive areas in a North Vietnamese steel mill. We hit it for 10 days. It was dead after the second day, but we continued to hit it for 10 days. Twice a day, told to go and bomb the snot out of it, and we're losing airplanes. We probably lost 10 to 15 airplanes bombing that stupid rail facility. Then we moved over and took out the blast furnaces, and we bombed that for 10 days, and that was dead after the second. And they, the North Vietnamese, are moving in more and more SAMs, and more guns, and more MiGs, and we lost a bunch of other guys. By the time we were through, the whole place looked like the surface of the moon. And then they'd send us to bomb some other piece of something, and we were at it for 30 days. We could have done the whole blooming thing in a couple of days. Okay, I've censored some of the mild swear words that he says there. By the way, SAMs are surface-to-air missiles, one of the major threats against American aircraft operating during Rolling Thunder. And MiGs are Soviet-built MiG fighters like the MiG-17 that were also a threat to US aircraft operating over Vietnam. You might want to pause the video here and make some notes based upon the content, your own knowledge related to these sources and the purpose of these sources. Not because you're going to answer a question directly on them, but because you could use this as evidence to back up what you look at with the interpretations. Alternatively, as long as you've got this in sufficient resolution, you could screenshot this and print a copy or have a copy next to you while you're answering the questions. I'll leave it up to you. If you're going to do that, do so now. Okay, let's move on to the next section. First thing that you'll need to do with any interpretation question is you'll need to read the interpretations. So here they are. The interpretations, remember, are always taken from history books. You don't use them in exactly the same way as sources. We're not here to say that one author is necessarily wrong or one author is necessarily right. We're here to compare their views and try and understand how they've come to those views before deciding which one we would better believe in. Interpretation 1 is from the Vietnam War, 1956 to 1975, which was published in 2014 by Andrew West. He's discussing Operation Rolling Thunder. The North's war supplies came, in the main, from its communist allies, who the American bombers could not reach. Although the US dropped over 643,000 tons of bombs on North Vietnam, the return on the investment was negligible, tiny. Estimates by 1967 suggest that it cost the US $9.60 to inflict $1 of damage. In addition, the fighter bombers that carried out the bulk of the bombing stood only a 50% chance of surviving their 1-year tour of duty. Alright, so what is the opinion of this particular author? Does he seem to be supportive of Rolling Thunder and think it was a good idea, or the opposite? Let's compare that to interpretation 2, also from a book. From The Vietnam War, published in 2007, by Mitchell K. Hall. He is discussing Rolling Thunder. During 1966, Rolling Thunder expanded to include North Vietnam's oil storage facilities, including those in the Hanoi and Haiphong areas, and destroyed 70% of the North's capacity. Sorties, that means a mission, so one sortie is one plane taking off on one mission. They don't record how many landed because, well, some of them get shot down. Anyway, sorties, or missions, reached 108,000 in 1967, dropping 226,000 tons of bombs on North Vietnam. During that year, the United States hit electrical, steel and cement factories and targets near Hanoi, Haiphong and the Chinese border, with an estimated damage of $340 million. Alright, what I'm going to do is I'm going to place these interpretations in the description as well, as long as it doesn't completely overrun the number of words I'm allowed. So if you want to copy and paste them in elsewhere, or take a screenshot of this for use in the future questions, then please do so. You might want to pause the video here and make some notes about the general opinion of these two interpretations and how it's supported. Also, what is their focus? Is it exactly the same? Are they looking at the exact same time frames? Are they looking at the exact same angles and exact same circumstances relating to Rolling Thunder? Or are they subtly different? This might explain some of the differences in the interpretations or views of these historians. When you're ready to move on, we'll do so, and we'll have a look at question 2. Question 2. What is the difference between these two views of Operation Rolling Thunder? Okay, here it says views of Operation Rolling Thunder, but whatever it says in the exam, it will be phrased in a similar way. It could be these two views of the Tet Offensive, or these two views of the Kent State shooting. Whatever it is, it'll be 4 marks, and this is probably the easiest of the interpretations questions, so you won't want to spend too long on it. You'll probably get it done in 4 or 5 minutes tops. Here's how you answer. Describe the difference between two examples or views given in the interpretations, linked to your own knowledge about Operation Rolling Thunder. That's to contextualise it. Again, here are our interpretations. If you're going to have a practice at that, great, you can pause the video here and give it a go. If not, I'll show you an example answer next. Let's have a look at an example answer then. It could go like this, although you might have written something entirely different, but look for the way that it's backed up with examples. Interpretation 1 suggests that Operation Rolling Thunder was a failure because the USA could not make much of an impact on the North's war industries. It cost $9.60 to inflict $1 of damage. Alright, that's 2 marks got already. Let's have a look at the difference. Interpretation 2 suggests that Operation Rolling Thunder was at least partly successful because of the damage that was done, $340 million or 70% of the North's capacity. Again, 2 marks for that as well. 4 marks in total. You'll see that I've identified a relevant difference in their views, summed it up, and given supporting examples. It's as simple as that. I wish the next one was, although it's not as difficult as you sometimes can make it out. Explain why these two views might be different. Again, it's only worth 4 marks, so you don't want to be spending too long on here. But typically, in order to get the views across, you'll find that most students tend to write a little bit more for this one than for the one before. Here's how you answer it. You explain what facts or examples might explain the differences between the two interpretations. What events or facts might make the same event be viewed in different ways? Might the authors have used different sources in their work? And that's a crucial thing. The reason I started with the sources, without actually going over question 1, is because if they are relevant, and they probably will be if they are in the exam booklet, you can actually use this to help justify your answer. And you do not need to get into the heads of these historians in order to get full marks on this. You just simply need to explain a credible way or a credible reason why these historians have got different views of effectively the same event. Here are the interpretations again. Give yourself 5 or 6 minutes to do this question. If not, we'll move on and we'll have a look at an example. Here's the example answer. One reason that the interpretations may differ is because they focus on different aspects of Operation Rolling Thunder. Interpretation 1 focuses on the fact that the operation went on for a long time at a great cost in terms of money, equipment and men, without resulting in the USA winning the war. This is supported by source A, which shows the expensive equipment involved, in this case the photograph of the fighter bomber jets doing the mission. On the other hand, interpretation 2 focuses on the actual damage caused by the bombing. Rolling Thunder ran from 1965 to 1968. And in this time, thousands of tons of bombs were dropped, which did cause physical damage, though as interpretation 1 suggests, this didn't affect the outcome of the war. This is supported by source B, which describes the damage. In fact, you could use these sources for the opposite interpretations if you wanted to. Interpretation 1 seems to suggest that this was wasteful. It suggests that the fighter bombers that carried out the bulk of the bombing stood only a 50% chance of surviving their 1-year tour of duty. And source B refers to the losses that American planes suffered. Equally, interpretation 2 focuses on the damage done. And source A gives a good example of this damage being done with an accurate strike on a rail facility. Okay, this is where things get a little bit more serious, and you'll probably want to spend about half an hour on this question. Typically, it's 16 marks, so it's an essay-style question, and it carries a bonus 4 marks for spelling, punctuation, and grammar, and the use of specialist historical vocabulary. First of all, let's unpack the question. How far do you agree with the interpretation that the return on the investment in Operation Rolling Thunder, 1965 to 68, was negligible or tiny, which is in interpretation 1? Explain your answer using your knowledge of the historical context. With these longer questions, you might be used to getting some stimulus points afterwards, in other words, where it says you may use the following in your answer. Because you've been given so much information in both the interpretations and in the sources, you don't get any extra help with that. So do remember that you absolutely must use the interpretations, and you could use the sources if they are relevant, and they probably will be. Firstly, something that I sometimes do with my students is we do a bug, a box, underline, and glance. Firstly, we box the instructions. What is this question actually asking us? How far do you agree with the interpretation? So you've got to decide how far you agree, to a great extent, to a small extent, whatever. And you've got to explain your answer using your knowledge of the historical context. Make a note as well that actually it's a 16-mark answer, so you should be spending quite a lot of time on it, and it's got marks for spelling, punctuation, and grammar. So no excuse, for example, for leaving out things like capital letters. Now let's underline the key details and make sure that we've understood what the question is actually asking us. We should be focusing on this idea that the return on the investment in Operation Rolling Thunder was negligible or tiny. This suggests that Rolling Thunder was a waste of time or it was unsuccessful. Here's overall how you answer the question. You have to give arguments for both sides. So in what ways is this idea that Operation Rolling Thunder had very little impact well supported? And then in what ways is interpretation 2 well supported? You have to give an overall conclusion. Remember, how far? To an extent, limited extent, a great extent? What is it? And you could use the tried and tested technique of point, example, explain, and link to back to the question. You make a point. In what way is the interpretation supported or challenged? You give supporting examples from your knowledge of the historical context and explain it. And then you link it back to the question. You say whether or not you agree with that view or not, and make sure that you're directly addressing the question. If you're going to give that a go now, then give yourself half an hour to do it. If not, let's move on. So here's an example paragraph. This is not going to be a complete answer, but it shows you one way that you might approach it. In many ways, Operation Rolling Thunder was a failure. That's the point highlighted in red. Although interpretation 2 refers to 70% of the North's war industries being destroyed, this did not have a big effect on the North's ability to fight. There's an example. This is because North Vietnam got most of its war supplies from allies such as Russia and China, which were beyond the reach of American bombers, as attacking them would have escalated the war. Instead, target lists were limited, leading to the situation described in source B, where the aircraft were wasted in missions against targets that were already destroyed. Right, there's my further expansion and explanation using the source notice. This supports interpretation 1 because it shows that despite the huge number of bombs being dropped, they weren't hitting the highest value targets, showing a poor effect from for the vast expense of the US bombing. And that's linking it back to the question. Is it supported or does it go against it? Let's consider the other side to the argument. Again, I've color-coded this with point, example, explain, and link picked out in colours. Here's another example paragraph. However, Operation Rolling Thunder did have some significant effects on the war. Although the USA spent tremendous amounts of money on Operation Rolling Thunder, it did a significant amount of damage. In particular, once Hanoi and Haiphong became targets, as outlined in Interpretation 2, the air raids became more effective as they were able to hit the supplies being brought in from Russia. Source A shows that these strikes were capable of great accuracy. This opposes interpretation 1 because it shows that despite the huge number of bombs being dropped, they weren't hitting the highest value targets, and better supports interpretation 2's view that rolling thunder was succeeding in being destructive. If you're unaware of some of this historical contextual information, you might need to go back and review this topic. But remember, the focus of this video is actually about the skills used in answering such a question, not having a good knowledge of rolling thunder. You'll need to conclude as well. It might look something like this. In conclusion, I mostly agree with interpretation 1 that the return on the investment on Operation Rolling Thunder was negligible. That's a point that is absolutely addressing the question posed. How far do you agree? Although interpretation 2 rightly points out that American bombers devastated the North's war industries, this did not affect the outcome of the war. Rolling Thunder's objective was to destroy North Vietnam's ability to continue fighting, and partly because of the support the North got from China and Russia, the war was not won by American bombing. This supports interpretation 1 because despite the huge expense in money and lives, Rolling Thunder achieved little other than to turn the American public against the war. You don't have to agree with that, but this gives an outline as to how you approach such a question. So, let's look at some final points. Final tips for you. Do use the sources if they are relevant, and they almost certainly will be. Do compare the interpretations, and do spend most of your time on question 4, the 16-mark one. It could help to plan your answer first as well, and to check the SPAG when you finish. So remember, there are 4 marks for spelling, punctuation and grammar, and your use of specialist terminology. Do not run out of time doing long answers for questions 2 and 3. They're only worth 4 marks apiece. And do not treat the interpretations like sources. We aren't looking to say that one author is right or the other is wrong, or one is useful and the other isn't. We are comparing their views, and ultimately, depending on what the question is asking us, deciding how well supported they are. And that's the end of this rapid revision session. It's been a bit longer than some, but then this is probably the longest section of the exam in all of the 3 papers that you might end up doing. So I hope it's been worth the time. If it has, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and if there are other exam skills that you're desperate I would go over, please pop them in the comments below and I'll see if I can get that done for you. Thanks for watching, and goodbye.